warring sides in Ukraine sign a ceasefire agreement following talks in the Belarusian capital. The Iraqi army steps up its operations to take back the cities of Tikrit and Mosul from Islamic State militants. A wave of terrorist bombings across Iraq leaves at least 20 people dead and scores of others injured. And hundreds of thousands of people pour into the streets across Yemen, vowing to take decisive measures to force the government to resign. Good evening and welcome. You're watching Al Natija World News. Officials from Kiev and representatives of the two self-proclaimed republics in southeastern Ukraine have agreed to a ceasefire. The announcement follows closed-door meetings between the warring sides in the Belarusian capital this afternoon.
In what could mark the end of almost 6 months of intense fighting in eastern Ukraine, authorities in Kiev and pro-Russian rebels have finally put their differences aside, signing a ceasefire agreement. According to the Russian Interfax news agency, the truce agreement reportedly comes into force starting 6 p.m. local Ukrainian time. The ceasefire protocol reportedly contains 14 items, including all aspects of control, exchange of prisoners and other issues. Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko confirmed the ceasefire agreement and has reportedly ordered Ukraine's commander-in-chief to inform his forces in the eastern areas to cease fire by 6 p.m.
And based on this agreement, on this protocol, I give an order to chief of my military to declare a ceasefire in a half an hour time at 6 o'clock Ukrainian time, 4 o'clock London time.
Pro-Russian rebels in Donetsk and Luhansk, for their part, also voiced their willingness to abide by the truce.
We are also ready at 1800 Kiev time to stop firing from both sides, according to obligation about the ceasefire. But this does not mean that the ceasefire means the change of our course, which is our intention.
Ceasefire will allow us to save lives, not only of peaceful citizens, but of those people who with arms fight for their ideals, goals, tasks.
The long-awaited end to the hostilities came as the sound of shelling was resonating in the southeastern Ukrainian city of Mariupol this afternoon. Continued fighting in and around Donetsk and daily shelling of residential areas has made it difficult for residents here to believe that a permanent ceasefire is even possible.
I have doubts. Poroshenko is a traitor. He spoke about a ceasefire yesterday, but he was uncertain. He gives promises to people, but they are just lies.
I don't have any hopes for peace. I have doubts. If only there is peace. I am for peace.
For the time being, however, the announcement paves the way for implementing the 7-step peace plan, which was proposed by the conflicting sides by Russian President Vladimir Putin. The Russian president's proposal includes a halt to the militias' advances in the Donetsk and Lugansk regions, as well as the full withdrawal of Kiev's troops to a distance that makes shelling impossible.
Meanwhile, the 28 leaders from NATO member states met in Newport, Wales on Friday for the second and final day. The summit was aimed at presenting both a unified front against Russia and tackling other issues which the military alliance deems a threat to its interests. At the top of the agenda was the conflict in Ukraine, and in an effort to reassure allies rattled by the crisis in the east of the country, leaders agreed to set up a rapid reaction force and to maintain a continuous presence in Eastern Europe. Meanwhile, U.S. President Barack Obama announced NATO's plans to provide security assistance for Ukraine.
Today, we agreed to create what I would call a spearhead within our response force. A very high readiness force able to deploy at very short notice. This spearhead will include several thousand land troops ready to deploy within a few days with air, sea and special forces support.
To ensure that NATO remains prepared for any contingency, we agreed to a new Readiness Action Plan. The alliance will update its defense planning. We will create a new highly ready rapid response force that can be deployed on a very short notice. We'll increase NATO's presence in Central and Eastern Europe with additional equipment, training, exercises, and troop rotations. Our alliance is fully united in support of Ukraine's sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity, and its right to defend itself. To back up this commitment, all 28 NATO allies will now provide security assistance to Ukraine.
For its part, Russia's foreign ministry issued a statement warning NATO's leaders that the alliance's planned military exercises in Ukraine could undermine the peace process in the country. The statement read, "The military exercises planned for September 16 through the 26th will cause increased tensions, threaten the tentative progress and the peace progress in Ukraine, and contribute to the aggravation of a split in the Ukraine society." Well, for more analysis on these latest developments, Chris Banbury, a political analyst, joins us now via Skype from London. Mr. Banbury, is this ceasefire agreement in eastern Ukraine a turning point in the region's month-long conflict?
You're on.
Mr. Banbury?
Nope.
Can you hear me okay? Okay, well, we're getting back to Mr. Banbury just a little bit in the program. Let's continue. Well, the crisis in Ukraine was high on the agenda with that NATO summit. But the menace of Islamic State militants in Iraq and Syria got its share of attention, claiming that there was no resistance among NATO members against Washington's efforts to combat the Islamic State. The U.S. President Barack Obama said that the so-called IS must be destroyed. Meanwhile, Iraqi forces have made fresh advances against IS militants as fierce battles rage on the outskirts of the cities of Tikrit, Mosul, as well as the city of Fallujah.
I did not get any resistance or pushback to the basic notion that we have a critical role to play in rolling back this savage organization that is causing so much chaos in the region and is harming so many people and poses a long-term threat to the safety and security of NATO members. So there's great conviction that we have to act as part of the international community to degrade and ultimately destroy ISIL.
Washington has used the two-day NATO summit in Wales to sell another war in Iraq. But unlike Operation Iraqi Freedom back in 2003, it's not only ruling out boots on the ground, but this time it's waiting for an invitation from Baghdad. It's still unclear how many nations may join this so-called international coalition against the Islamic State militant group. But while President Barack Obama cautiously auctions the Pentagon's latest venture among diplomatic circles, U.S. aircrafts have been targeting Islamic State militants intensively for the past week. Taking matters into their own hands, the Iraqi army has been turning the tide against the extremist militants. The Iraqi army launched airstrikes on the outskirts of Iraq's second city of Mosul in the northern district of Al-Dur. Backed by air, motor and artillery fire, Iraqi security forces and groups such as the Hezbollah brigades have been pushing into the militant-held city of Tikrit. Iraqi National Defense Forces, along with the Hezbollah brigades, carried out a joint operation targeting IS positions in the western city of Fallujah. But with these recent gains, the militant group's atrocities continue to haunt the Iraqi people. 35 bodies have been recovered from a mass grave near the northern town of Sulayman Bek. The victims, who were all shot in the head, were believed to be Shia truck drivers kidnapped by militants 3 months ago. And as humanitarian aid begins to trickle into the city, locals are worried that many Islamic State militants escaping the government-led military campaign may blend back into the surrounding communities, rendering them hard to target. The recent achievements by the Iraqi army and its paramilitary subsidiaries have left IS militants on the back foot, with government forces striving to achieve their objectives in the city of Tikrit and beyond.
Our correspondent Mustafa Al-Qattan is now with us for more on this crisis. Mustafa, what can you tell us about the Iraqi forces' operations today on the outskirts of Tikrit and Mosul?
Yes, actually, the city of Amerli witnessed high activity. Actually, several troops were moved out of the city of Amerli and also to the villages that surrounding Amerli. As I have been told from one of the commanders in Hezbollah brigades, who actually working jointly with the Iraqi security forces, that they are preparing to launch a massive assault on the strongholds of IS militants within the borders of Salah ad-Din province. We received the report that the Iraqi security forces continue to advance in the city of Tikrit, and they said that the Iraqi security forces now has tightened its grip on the city of Tikrit. Also, there is several military operations are taking place in the Lu'iyya and also in Nahiyat al-Alam in Salah ad-Din province. Also, the Hezbollah brigades, alongside with the Iraqi security forces, have managed to recapture several villages that were surrounding the city of Amerli. One of them called Al-Bu Hassan, which witnessed severe clashes between the Iraqi security forces and Hezbollah brigades. The Iraqi security, all these operations, according to officials in the Ministry of Defense, they confirmed that all these operations occurred and all the victories occurred without the help of the United States of America or its Air Force. However, the Iraqi Air Force continued to conduct several airstrikes on the militant hideouts in the city of Tikrit and also in other places in Salah ad-Din province. Also, the Iraqi Air Force conducted several airstrikes in the outskirts of Mosul, and that actually will boost the operations on the ground, and that will lead eventually to isolate IS militants in the city of Mosul. Yes.
Okay, Mustafa, at the moment, are Iraqis optimistic that the Islamic State militants can still be pushed back?
Well, actually, the victory that has been achieved in Amerli were a great shifting point in the strategy of the Iraqi security forces, and actually it has reflected positively on the performance of the Iraqi security forces. Of course, also there is some political analysts and security experts, both of them confirmed that IS militants now actually switching from attacking to defending that situation. Now they are actually in defending position in all the places that actually were controlled by them, in Fallujah and also in Salah ad-Din. Also in Mosul, they said that IS militants are taking their caution procedures to prevent the penetration of the Iraqi security forces alongside with Hezbollah brigades and other factions. So several officials from regional countries and also from the United States and UK, they keep confirming and keep saying that IS militants are well-funded, tremendously organized, very well equipped, and beyond everything that we have seen. So they try to embolden these militants by these statements. In my point of view, and actually this is what most of the fighters in Hezbollah brigades and Iraq security forces are believe, that the impregnable picture of IS militants have been shattered, especially after the liberation of Amerli and the other villages that is surrounding this town. Yes.
Okay, well, Mustafa, our Iraq correspondent, thank you for those updates. Now staying in Iraq, where at least 20 people were killed and scores of others were injured in a wave of terrorist attacks. The deadliest attack took place in a busy market in Baghdad's southeastern district of Za'afaraniya, where 12 people were killed after a car bomb detonated. Another bomb killed 3 people near an outdoor market in the Ubaidi district in eastern Baghdad. For more analysis on these latest developments, Mudher, Khairallah, a political analyst, now joins us from London. Mr. Khairallah, is there a genuine global effort to confront the IS threat, or is this rhetoric from the NATO summit little more than a PR stunt?
I do genuinely think that this is more than a PR stunt. I think there is now global effort and a global interest in ending the fight of ISIS. Unfortunately, a lot of people feel that it has been late coming. Nevertheless, they've seen journalists from the United States and a journalist who's from the United Kingdom currently under threat by ISIS. ISIS have openly threatened Western countries that they will commit terrorist attacks within their countries. We've seen direct effort from members of NATO already, either through military support to the Peshmerga, through arming them directly, or through contributions through airstrikes that help regain strategic grounds such as the dam at Mosul, and helping us end the siege against the town of Amerli. Now, there has been direct support to the Peshmerga and indirectly to the central government in Iraq. And they have now formally invited Iraq through Andreas Fogh Rasmussen, who has stated that Iraq's central government can now seek NATO support when they deemed it's necessary.
Okay, well, if Washington was serious about dealing a blow to the IS, then it would be logical to work with both Tehran and Damascus. Is that likely to happen?
I think behind the scenes, this is already happening. There is strong evidence now that there is work occurring in the background between all the nations who are finding the Islamic State a threat. But now formally, Iran's supreme leader has approved cooperation with the US as part of the fight against Islamic State in Iraq. That's sources through the BBC, of course, the BBC Persian. We have seen other sources from other media outlets that contest this claim, but I think this will be coming. In Damascus, it will be a different picture altogether. I think now they are weighing the pros and cons. Initially, they thought it was wise to support what they thought was rebels against an autocratic regime in the form of Bashar al-Assad and his Ba'ath regime. However, this, of course, opened a vacuum that was taken, and there was an advantage that was taken by terrorist groups affiliated to Al-Qaeda. And, of course, now that has become the bigger threat to the stability of the region. So I think, although they wouldn't necessarily approach Damascus directly, I think, and I'm hoping that for them to get rid of the threat of ISIS, they will strike directly, even if it's airstrikes within Syria itself.
Okay, well, let's talk about the so-called IS or ISIS or whatever acronym is appropriate these days. What do these recent advances by the Iraqi army tell us about the military capabilities of this group?
It's interesting that you say that they keep changing their name and acronym, and I agree with you. I mean, I think it is highly inappropriate to call them the Islamic State or the Islamic State of Iraq or Syria or the Levant. What we should have in Iraq is an acronym that contains Al-Qaeda within it and contains terrorism with it. Of course, they're not going to use that acronym, and unfortunately, media outlets have to use what they claim or call themselves to be. But I think most people know that they are a group that is vicious, that contains extremist ideology of misinterpreting a lot of Islam and conducting a medieval act of torture and slaughter and genocide. I think one turning point has certainly been in recent days what's happened in Amerli and how the siege ended. Amerli is a small town that has perhaps 5,000, 10,000 people, its own inhabitants, including women and children who had to fight the siege and prevent ISIS from entering the town. I think the fact that they stood strong for at least 2.5 months and 3 months not only indicates the courage that will be historic as far as the town of Amerli is concerned and the heroes that were within that produced this, but I think more than that, it has brought back faith that a lot of this propaganda about how strong this Al-Qaeda group is now factually incorrect. I think what's happened is this group, if it finds fertile ground where they can find stability and a base where they can fight and cause havoc within any region, then they will succeed. But clearly in the town of Amerli, they could not identify such a platform. They could not find a fertile ground for them to base their military operations, and therefore they lost and they were unable to overcome that siege.
So does the IS really pose a threat to countries outside of Iraq and Syria?
That again depends on the countries that they're willing to attack. So for example, I suspect that Jordan and Saudi Arabia would be definitely a threat because they know more than any other country that a lot of their people do carry similar extremist ideology and therefore would provide fertile ground for ISIS to gain massive size gains within the region should they invade into these countries and cause instability. Other countries and nations that would feel the threat are the countries where Western-born militants have joined this terrorist organization from the United Kingdom, the United States, Australia, and France, and other countries, of course, where these individuals have the capability of coming back to attack. The attacks that they've tried, ISIS has tried against Lebanon's Hezbollah, for example, the regions where Hezbollah has some control, or indeed against Iran, for example, have doomed with failure. Indeed, even within Baghdad and the areas around Baghdad, they really struggled to cross those boundaries, and that's why they turned on the Kurds quite recently. So it depends on what type of fertile ground they can find in order to progress.
Okay, Mr. Mudher Khairallah, political analyst, thank you very much for joining us.